welcome to this course, which is offered by the European Urban Knowledge Network. Abbreviation is EUKN. We are a network of member states working together at the European level with several member states that are quite active in the field of urban policy and practice. And we provide all kinds of different services to the members of our network, which are mostly the ministries which are responsible for what we call at this European level urban matters. My name is Martin Grisel. I'm the director founder of the EUKN, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Frederica Risi, who is the Senior Policy and Program Officer, working already for almost 6 years at the EUKN, and she is also our internal green expert. And that's actually the topic that we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about green cities and active living, which is a topic that has become quite, or is becoming quite important now also at the European level for many different reasons that we will also explain in this lecture. We're going to split a bit the lecture between the two of us. So I will now be happy to hand over to my colleague Frederica to further introduce the course to you, and then I'll come back a bit later. So up to you,
Martin,
Frederica.
thank you very much for the introduction. Before we turn it over to Federica, let me please open the seminar with a few words. Hello, welcome.
All right.
My name is Lenka Buštíková. I'm the director of the University of Florida's Center for European Studies. The center is a Title VI National Resource Center and FLAS provider for Europe, as well as a multidisciplinary area and language studies center. Thank you for joining us for our European Studies Because speaker series with today's talk, Green Cities, Active Living. We are excited to welcome Martin Grisel and Frederica Risi, who will examine how European cities are integrating nature-based solutions into urban policy and planning to promote active, healthy lifestyles and strengthen urban resilience. Let me introduce our presenters briefly. Martin Grisel is the director and founder of the European Urban Knowledge Network, a European grouping of territorial cooperation that supports national governments, EU institutions, and other stakeholders in the field of urban policy and research. He has over 20 years of experience in urban development policy. Federica Risi is a senior policy and project officer at the European Urban Knowledge Network. Her current projects focus on restoring urban ecosystems with nature-based solutions. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. When you leave Zoom, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. To ask questions, please use the chat. The questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. With that, I'll hand it over to Federica. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great, thank you so much, Lenka, and also Martin for the introduction and presentation of our lecture for today. Let me just say that it's a real privilege to be with you, even though we don't see the students. We do look forward to interacting with you at the end of the lecture through a Q&A. So for today, our ideas are to first give a brief overview of who we are and the different activities that we perform. Then we want to zoom in on one of our most recent activities, which is on the topic of the lecture, Green Cities, Active Living. And then we want to unpack a little bit further, more in details, the key frameworks and concepts that frame this activity, and also understand what the ramifications of these key concepts are in cities, in urban environments. And then we will move on to a section focusing more on the policy considerations and impacts and how concepts such as nature-based solutions can be further scaled up in the European Union, but also beyond. So who we are and what we do. As Martin already said, we are an intergovernmental network of cooperation. Technically, we are defined as a European grouping of territorial cooperation that was established in The Hague in 2004. And we really are a small team. We are a small secretariat, but we support several member states in the European Union, including Spain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Czechia, and Slovenia. I don't think I'm missing anyone. While we do support member states, politically we are independent. We define our work as being situated at the interface of what we call science, policy, and research, in the sense that we explore and we co-create and we deal with different types of knowledges that can inform policies on the ground. And at this interface, we deliver a variety of services spanning from strategic policy advice and development of urban agendas to research and innovation activities on several sustainable urban development topics. We also co-create, as I said, and exchange knowledges, support dissemination and co-creation through thematic policy labs, which we'll review in a few minutes. And we also partner with different types of organizations, both in the European context and in the global one. On top of that, we support cooperation between governments, and we also support the rotating council presidency of the European Union. To give you a snapshot of our activities, we commonly differentiate between member state-driven activities such as policy labs, and here you have screenshots of some of the most recent topics that we dealt with, from urban equality to climate resiliency to nature restoration. And these activities are knowledge-driven in the sense that a member state comes to us with the knowledge demands, and through our research and other types of services, we try to fill and address that gap. The other type of activities are more project-based, and in this type of activities, we act as a think tank in the sense that we have a bit more independence when it comes to choosing the topics and also the partnerships that we form. But before delving into this, I want to give the floor back to Mart to explore indeed our most recent policy labs on nature moves us that dealt with the topic of this class.
Yeah, thank you, Frederica. And I noticed I went too fast indeed, skipping the overall introduction. Apologies for that. It's also because we have quite a few things to say about our activities. We would like to address indeed this topic of let's say, the nexus between the importance of investing in green spaces, green public spaces, or any kind of other greening in cities, and this idea of human health and well-being in cities. But I said already, this is a topic that has become more and more important for a number of very good reasons that I will also explain in a second. But we see that it is also to bridge, let's say, the policy silos between the different, let's say, policy professionals at different levels, both at city level, but the same applies also to the ministries which are responsible for urban development, and also even at the European level, that everyone is actually working in their own silos. And knowing that health has become such an important topic, it is important to also raise awareness among urban planners and spatial planners about the way let's say, the built environment and the construction of green public spaces, or the restoration of nature in urban settlements or outside urban settlements, also impact health issues at the local and the regional levels. So this is what we did quite recently, actually last week in Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, where we looked into these different relations to really understand how physical activity, different forms of, let's say, also of behavioral change can lead to better health and better feelings of better quality of life, even of citizens in the different cities that we looked into. And this This concept also, or this notion of, let's say, the linkages between health and urban and spatial planning also takes place against the background of different, let's say, more theoretical notions, like the one on planetary health. And for this, indeed, we needed to look into, let's say, different concepts that exist. You could say this graph that you see here sort of depicts the development or the way of thinking about public health, starting with indeed just literally this notion of public health, which was very much, let's say, focus at the national level. I mean, every ministry, every city has a public health officer, but more and more a bit later, this notion of global health became also more important. And that's a notion which focuses more on the different health determinants and risk and solutions that operate also across different countries and regions. And that emphasize actually also a shared responsibility and collective action to prevent diseases and to promote well-being and to strengthen health systems at a global scale. This notion of global health became, of course, also more important with, let's say, different infectious diseases, and even more so with the rise of COVID, where we also saw that a collaborative and multi-level approach was needed to work to enable also collaboration at the interface of human and animal and environmental health. And this to prevent and detect and respond to different health threats, promoting at the same time sustainable and resilient cities. Well, this notion of One Health is still used a lot, actually. And some people say, okay, there's not such a huge difference between One Health and planetary health, but there are some differences. And this notion of planetary health goes even a bit further. It is the achievement of the highest sustainable standard of human health and well-being through attention to, let's say, systemic aspects like political, economic, social, and environmental systems that actually shape the future of humanity and also the Earth's natural systems on which it depends. And this notion of planetary health has become increasingly important also in discussions on mitigating climate change. It highlights the effect of human-caused disruptions to the Earth system on urban health and addresses the complex interactions between these environmental changes, human activity, and the different many dimensions of human health. Planetary health, in that sense, presents an and a transdisciplinary approach to driving solutions. For some, there's not, if you would talk to different experts, some would focus more on, or would rather use One Health or planetary health. So there is a bit of an overlap between these two concepts. But the two of them actually build on equivalent systematic principles. And one can say that they differ a bit in focus. One Health predominantly focuses on animal health and zoonosis, and planetary health focuses more on these environmental health and human health, with this focus on climate change and social determinants of health. And this notion of planetary health has become indeed increasingly important, and was also the inspiration of a movement that we actually presented also at this, what we call a policy lab in Slovenia, and that's the 24-hour behavior movement. And that's our next slide. This 24-hour movement program or framework or whatever you call it actually came from Canada. It started in Canada and was adopted also to the Slovenian context. I must say, I've never really seen much of this Canadian approach to the 24-hour movement or paradigm or framework. They use different, let's say, notions also to refer to it. But let's say the principles are still the same. The idea is actually you only have 24 hours per day. That's not a surprise, of course. But during that 24 hours, you need to make a couple of choices. Every single person, every single individual needs to make a couple of choices. How much time do I spend on physical activities? How long do I want to sit down? So what is my sedentary behavior? And how much sleep do I want to get? And this the idea is that you need to find a balance between these three different aspects. So over an overall week, because you can play a bit with the, let's say, the way you sort of divide your 24-hour hours in a day. But there are some guidelines to be respected. And here it becomes really challenging because you could say, come on, I mean, I can easily sit 7 hours per day, for instance, but you also need to sleep 7 to 9 hours per day. And then you also need to be physically active. So here you need to make a couple of choices. And this becomes even more, let's say, challenging when you also think about the different guidelines that were produced by the health experts that participated in our policy lab. And that is, for instance, you need to spend 150 minutes to moderate or vigorous activities per week. You need to strengthen your muscles also around twice a week. You need to improve your balance if you're an older person. And you need also to spend some time in, let's say, lighter forms of activities like gardening or cleaning your house or just simple walking and doing some shopping. And I don't know if this is also an expression in the US, but in Europe, we say that sitting is the new sleeping. There are many diseases that are linked back to, let's say, sedentary behavior. And the recommendation is, and that's a really challenging one, also looking at myself, not more than 7 hours per day. And that's already almost a working day. And some people indeed spend even more than 7 hours per day on a chair behind a computer. And then the recommendation is not to spend more than 3 hours per day for leisure in screen time, for instance. Well, I know that for young people and students, this is also quite challenging today. And then their sleep becomes also more and more increasingly important. And the recommendation is for young people to sleep at least 7 to 9 hours per day. This becomes difficult, of course. And then the question, and here it becomes also interesting in our field of work, this 24-hour movement with these recommendations, which are very concrete, they actually also offer urban planners and spatial planning a new lens to design healthy environments. Because the goal is not just to, let's say, to provide these all different kinds of recreational facilities, but also to, let's say, to ensure that these opportunities for movement are actually also provided by the built environment or by, let's say, green spaces close or a bit further away from your home. And that means that we need to design spaces that enable short and frequent forms of different activities throughout the day and create environments that support also these physical activities. And that means that planning with these perspectives in mind, let's say responding to these principles of health in all policies, make that we need to position urban planning as a core partner of public health rather than a secondary contributor. And this led in our policy lab to different recommendations, actually. And that's another slide that we have. We have formulated different lessons for policymakers, starting with the first one, that prevention actually is the most cost-effective way of improving health. And it can be realized through health-oriented urban planning. And then second recommendation is that, or notion actually, is that indeed the environment shapes behavior. Residents reflect their surroundings, incentives, and also their daily constraints. So the built environment immediately has an impact or influences the way you behave. It also behaves the way you sleep, for instance. And it's important to think about that. Because that means that, and that's the third one, we need to design for daily life. That means that green infrastructures must meaningfully be connected to routines and support, for instance, enough quality sleep to also encourage physical activities. If you don't sleep well, you're not inclined to also be physically active. And the same applies also to active forms of mobility, which become another important aspect also in urban planning, to promote walking and biking in cities as much as possible. And that means that we need to invest in high quality green spaces that actually stimulate and drive physical activities, but also at the same time also offer all kinds of social benefits, or social spin-offs, like more cohesion and inclusion. I mean, it also allows for informal spaces actually to talk to each other. And that's also a need for children. That's the fifth recommendation, because children need nature. There's a whole, let's say, bunch of evidence of research showing how important it is for children to play in the nature, in the dirt, even to build resistance to all kinds of diseases. That's important not just for immune system functions, but also for their own imaginations, for motor skills, and many different other factors. In that sense, indeed, nature and activity matter. It's our fifth recommendation. Green spaces are essential for learning, for learning indeed, and nature and activity mobility matter in that sense. That means that we need to have cities with bikeable and walkable infrastructures to reduce all different kinds of health costs, to cut emissions, to clean the air, and also to reduce, for instance, noise effects in cities. And that means that it's the seventh one, actually, we need to implement effective nature-based solutions in cities. And this NBS, which is an important, let's say, concept also, not just, in Europe, it's also elsewhere. It must be treated as a central pillar of urban planning to address different dimensions such as health and climate, but also biodiversity, which is a lot under stress in many countries, as you know, not exclusively in Europe, but certainly also in the EU. And to do that, you need to cooperate across different sectors. That's the eighth recommendation, because that's crucial for the adaptation of the built environment to public health, and to make sure that we have the right green spaces guidelines. But it also requires an approach, let's say a tailor-made approach, because one size does not fit all, and that's the ninth recommendation that we also came up with, because there are differences between small and larger municipalities, especially the smaller municipalities. They need, let's say, implementation capacity. They also need they need the knowledge that sometimes is only available in the larger cities. And then the 10th is the last recommendations that we came up with during our policy lab. Build your policy also on evidence. In other words, measure what matters. Cities need clear indicators for green spaces, and for different type of physical activities also require different types of spaces. And I said already that, and that's our next slide, that if we look at this nature health nexus in cities, we see that the different, let's say, health-related problems are also interrelated with biodiversity loss, with air pollution and climate change. And the different graphs that we showed here also clearly indicate that sitting actually leads to quite a few human health problems. And actually, if we look at the situation today, cardiovascular diseases, which are also to a large extent linked to sedentary behavior, to bad air quality, to less mobility, for instance, they are the #1 death factor now in Europe. And I wouldn't be surprised if it would be the same in the US. So these risk factors linked to air pollution, to physical inactivity and obesity. I mean, look around in different cities, also in the US, of course, or even more so probably in the US. And you see that that is in a way, even you could say a ticking time bomb also for health issues later on. In that sense, indeed, increasing physical activities are of the utmost importance. Now, if we look at, let's turn a bit this negative picture indeed of all the different diseases. What can nature do to improve health? And it's quite impressive if you look at the really researched positive effects of engaging more in health, in nature, going through, let's say, enjoying nature, going out into the green spaces. It will lead to better mental health. It would also increase your life expectancy. It will even reduce the health costs for public authorities. It will make you smarter, and it will also create a healthier population. And indeed, it will also decrease the cardiovascular diseases. So this is actually quite a stunning picture of all the, let's say, the health benefits of investing in nature-based solutions. And it is interesting that some examples from European cities are quite interesting, and I think to a large extent even unique. And the first city that I want to show you is the city of Utrecht, which is the fourth largest city in the Netherlands, around 600,000 inhabitants. But what is really interesting about the city of Utrecht is that they literally put health at the core of their local policy. So every single policy, let's say, intervention, measure must be related to or must contribute to improving health in the city of Utrecht. So the local government actually promoted health. It wants to offer a living environment that allows indeed people to exercise and to socialize and to relax. It has this very strong focus on health protection, and health, let's say, services should be accessible to all. And this all was based on a citizen participation. In other words, the citizens of the city were actually actively involved in designing the city. And I must say that the result is quite spectacular. And I will show you a different picture here with the help of my colleague. Utrecht in the 1980s was a city that was divided. There was a motorway actually cutting the city in two. If you look at those two pictures from 1980 and from just a few years ago, you will still see the same church, but a totally different city. And there are many more of the similar kind of pictures. So what the city did was to reopen the original canals that were later on, let's say, transformed into this motorway. So they reopened the canals, let the water in, and invested a lot in green spaces. And this really allows now also people to recreate. So motorway was, the city became, let's say, much less car dependent, and it improved health already quite a lot. Another great example in Europe is the city of Barcelona. And it is interesting because this was also very much researched by an institute with which we work, IS Global in Barcelona. And actually they looked into what is called these super blocks in Barcelona. So you know that Barcelona has this quite typical structure of blocks designed in the late early 20th century or something like that. And they changed the, let's say, the traffic in those areas in a way, let's say, cut it off for car traffic, introduced other forms of mobility, greens the area. And based on research, it was said that if Barcelona would follow this example, it would save almost 700 lives. So this is a very clear indication that interventions in nature-based solutions actually save lives and improve the quality of life. It of course, as you will see in these graphs also, I mean, it reduces also deaths based on air pollution, on noise. So it will make sure that people sleep better, that the air is cleaner, that it also, let's say, brings back these heat island effects in cities, and that people are simply also more happy. And that brings me to the last slide I want to show you about the Barcelona superblocks. It also leads to, let's say, to other positive effects. People feel, let's say, they are more happy. Their mental health also improves. They are less depressive, and they need less tranquilizers, for instance, to cope with life. And what is important also in that respect is that it really also saves money. So the same institute, ICE Global, calculated that it would save around 45 million euros per year if this indeed would be followed. So this is a strong case of the importance of nature-based solutions. And with these two examples from two different European cities, very different cities, one relatively small, the other relatively big for European standards, I must emphasize, of course, I'd like to hand over back again to my colleague Frederica.
Thank you so much, Mart. And I have to say it's a bit ironic because we are talking about how much we need nature, and there is a fly that's just flying around me. So I'm trying to coexist with it, but it's very, very difficult at the moment. Anyway, nature-based solutions. So you've heard the term quite a bit by now, and it sounds catchy and it sounds quite straightforward, but actually is not, in the sense that there are very strict requirements when it comes to confirm what we can consider nature-based solutions. So some say that it is a European invention or a European concept. And actually in Europe, we do have an official definition of nature-based solutions that was adopted by the European Commission in 2015. And that is also now being used globally, especially within the academia domain and also within funding programs such as Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. What's important to say about this definition is that it highlights the capacity of these solutions, of these interventions to generate co-benefits for nature and society, from ecosystem restoration to improving urban health to fighting climate change. And I want to stress co-benefits in the sense that nature-based solutions can only be defined as such if they do provide a simultaneous positive impact for different sectors. But when did the term really emerge? So the first time we heard of this concept, it was 2022 in a European document that was proposing a paradigm shift, moving from, the idea of what nature offers us humans to how humans can contribute to nature, to a healthy nature, to healthy ecosystems. And it was later development by the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which even created a classification of different types of actions that can be considered nature-based solutions. And today, these concepts, these definitions are also being used by the World Bank, by the OECD, and different regional agencies and global agencies that might, let's say, adopt or commonly apply slightly different definitions, but with very common elements. The important thing is to emphasize, indeed, that nature-based solutions must address societal problems like climate change, the water crisis, health issues, and different type of social complex wicked problems through the protection, the restoration, and the integration of nature into policies and actions. And they must also contribute to biodiversity. So let's talk about typologies. And here there are different typologies of typologies, and commonly we can identify these typologies depending on the level of human intervention, from low human intervention based on the level of ecosystem alteration applied, which can be very minimal, to medium or high. To give you some examples of what this type of nature-based solutions can include, they can really span from green infrastructures in cities, in streets and squares, to the restoration of mangrove forests to protect against the risks or impacts of storms, to urban wetlands for water purification, for example, or also sustainable urban drainage systems. And this type of actions can be applied in different types of contexts and ecosystems, from urban ecosystems to terrestrial to coastal and marine ecosystems, and also freshwater. So while all of these types of actions are nature-based solutions, again, it's important to emphasize that not everyone immediately recognizes the term. Indeed, there is a need for plural understandings, in the sense that in different continents, in different geographies and cultures, nature-based solutions are referred to with slightly different terms. So in the United States and Latin America, you might hear more often about green infrastructure. In African and Asian countries, the term ecosystem-based adaptation might be more used. And also in the context of climate change discourse, the concept of climate solutions is actually becoming more and more popular. Now, some evidence from a recent project that we were involved in, which is called Connexus. It was an exchange program between Latin American cities and European cities. And some of our colleagues, through the analysis of scientific publications, assessed that there is a really high degree of difference between the use of the term in different contexts, from urban forests to urban green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, even though the type of actions that they were referring to were actually the same. So with this, what I would also like to underline is that while we are now talking about nature-based solutions and the term has become very popular, the idea of working with nature is not recent. It's millennia old. And indigenous culture especially have for centuries possessed a lot of knowledge of soil regeneration, water management, agroforestry, even alternative medicines. And they've always considered us humans as not something detached or separate from nature, but actually as a sacred part of it. And even though nature-based solutions has become this modern label, the type of practices that we are trying to reminisce and remember and reintegrate are very, very old. And they've always been part of human history and actually of our survival. So we have already covered how the term has evolved, but how is it being integrated? How is it being absorbed in policy spaces? So as you can see from these slides, there have been many regulatory strides demonstrating a clear trajectory towards more comprehensive and also a more integrated approach to nature protection and climate action within the European Union. Here we have an overview. I'm not going to talk about in details about all of them, but we have an overview of European laws and policies and agendas that promote nature restoration and the protection of nature. From the 1970s to the 90s, where we started with the first directives about biodiversity, to the early 2000s, when environmental integration started to deepen, including with the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal, to more recently, where we are really talking about how ecosystem restoration and nature restoration should be the container for all sectoral policies in different contexts. And more recently, actually in 2024, the EU Nature Restoration Law, initially a law, now regulation, was adopted that marked a clear milestone toward nature protection because, well, in the European Union, I'm sure if you're attending this seminar, you're quite familiar. Member states and Commission have different regulatory prerogatives. And normally environmental policy is a prerogative of the European level, while urban policy is left for member states to legislate on. And the nature restoration regulation contains an article, specifically Article 8, which commands the restoration of urban ecosystems, basically mandating on several targets toward nature protection, also on member states. Now, we have to acknowledge that the law, the regulation has been watered down a lot since first proposal, but yeah, at the same time does require major steps towards nature restoration. And the way we do things is also through different types of experimentations. And when it comes to urban development, urban policy, and urban planning, we have a few mechanisms that bring together different levels of governance. And a clear example is the urban agenda for the EU, which already in its first instance in 2016 included a partnership on nature-based solutions and sustainable use of land. What this partnership did was to bring together member states with cities, with different directorates of the EU to basically come together and understand how we could improve legislation, how we could improve knowledge, and also financing for scaling nature-based solutions. And in the later iteration of the urban agenda for the EU, we also have a partnership on greening cities, of which also we are part. So the EUKN is a partner in this partnership. And it has high political relevance because we are discussing and we're exploring different formats of how the law could indeed be implemented in practice. And now it's not just about policies and different forms of cooperation, it's also how strategic agendas are reflected in financing mechanisms and research and innovation. So you might know that the European Commission finances different types of projects under funding programs such as Horizon 2020, and that actually ended in 2020, and its successor, Horizon Europe, which will last until 2027. And under each funding program, there were about of 80 to 100 projects on nature-based solutions that received more or less 200 million in funding. And also in the current iteration of the program, Horizon Europe, there are several dozen of projects which will receive more or less 240 million. So it's a huge investment into nature protection, nature restoration, also in urban environments. The political momentum shows a clear nature positive direction, and there are also different agendas that explicitly link health and environment. And also in our day-to-day work, sometimes we use health almost as a proxy for sustainability. So we don't talk so much about sustainable cities anymore, but we do talk about healthy cities. And as Marta already mentioned before, this momentum calls for cross-sectoral, multi-level governance cooperation. Still, there are some challenges that I would also like to invite Mart to unpack.
Yeah, thank you, Frederica. Yes, the nature restoration regulation is unique in the sense that it is a regulation, which means that it needs to be implemented in every different member states. Now, Frederica already said it has been watered down quite a bit, also because of fear of what it might also mean for farmers in the agricultural sector at the European level. And they have a very strong lobby and influence also to a large extent national parliaments, but also the European Parliament. And we had elections last year, and there was a shift indeed to the right which now has an impact also on, let's say, the main targets, the green targets that were originally formulated. So the biggest program at the European level was this EU Green Deal from 2019 with the former Commission. That Green Deal is actually now a bit under stress because it had far-reaching ambitions. In 2050, the EU would become the first carbon-free continent globally. And we see that this is now indeed, these high ambitions are lowered down. And that will have an impact, of course, also how it would further unroll at the national level, but also at the level of the different cities, of course. And that means that with all the, I mean, if you combine this high-level political framework where we see that ambitions are lowered down, indeed, that also globally, this is very much under stress. I don't need to explain that to you, coming from a country which also questions the need for, let's say, very active climate action. But it's not the only country in the world, of course. I mean, there's also a lot of this debate and discussion in the EU and in other continents. If we combine all that, let's say, this political criticism with the very strong narrative that we just showed, that how many saves can be lived. I mean, what the benefits are of investing in green public spaces. That it will even lead to let's say, cuts in public spending because of the, let's say, the health benefits that it would also lead to. Then I think it's important to think about, okay, how can we reach out to policymakers? And this was also a question that we discussed quite a bit also in our policy lab. If we have these strong narratives of, let's say, the advantages of the 24-hour movement, or the good examples of the super blocks, or the case of Utrecht, and many other examples, of course, how does that combine now with this skepticism that we see worldwide? Where the let's say the ambitions of or the let's say where the narrative of the defenders of nature-based solutions or health politics are very much questioned indeed, or at least are debated in such a way that it becomes less prominent in the political debate. And with this reflection, I would like to hand over to our hosts. And hopefully also get some questions from the audience. That would be nice.